Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to talk about something called credible sources. You may have heard this phrase before in an English course here at NWIC or elsewhere, or any class where you're doing research. And when I say sources, what I mean is research. So any research you're using for a presentation, a project, a paper, and that source could be a book, it could be a scholarly article, it could be a newspaper article, etc. And when I say credible, I just mean sources that you can use. And we also use the phrase non-credible. That means sources that you cannot use. And more specifically, let's look at the next slide. When we say credible, when we say you can use this, what we mean is that the source is authoritative, it's factual, and like I've said, can be used in your research. And when we say authoritative, what we mean is that that source has been, it's research that comes from an expert in the field. Therefore, they are authoritative, they are knowledgeable on a given subject. And if the article has been peer-reviewed or it's in a reputable news source, it is factual, usually, and you have to use good judgment, but generally speaking, it's going to be factual if it's peer-reviewed, etc. And there's all kinds of nuance to what's credible and what's non-credible. So I'm speaking in generalizations today. But keep that in mind as a working definition, that it's authoritative and factual. And then non-credible, like I've said, you cannot use this in academic work. And it basically just means that it's not factual or isn't fact-checked. It may be biased and just generally speaking is lacking in quality. It's not reputable. May be written by someone who is not authority in the subject that the source is coming from. So here's a list of some credible and non-credible sources, and we'll look at some examples more specifically. And credible, most often you'll be using scholarly articles from JSTOR, Google Scholar, our library database, which I'll show you here in a second. Books from the college library are most often credible from a tribal website, institutional websites, so that means .org or .gov, website URLs that end with .org or .gov are usually good. Newspaper articles about an event are generally okay. You do have to make sure that you are pulling information from a source that's not too biased, which is a different conversation, but if you're covering, as we'll see, Standing Rock, the Standing Rock protests, and you need a newspaper article on the event, you can use that. So non-credible, and this is really important, you cannot use Wikipedia in your research. You cannot use articles that are sponsored, and that's a little more tricky. You'll see an example in the quiz that you'll have to pay close attention to. Basically, sponsored articles just means articles that a company is paying someone to write. Therefore, there's going to be bias, right? The company that's paying someone to write it has interests. Websites that seem unprofessional. So this is a more nuanced conversation, but generally speaking, you don't want to use .coms. But there may be some instances where you have to use a .com, but we want to stay away from that, generally speaking, and especially a website that just doesn't seem put together well. We don't want to use that. And then, last but not least, ChatGPT or other AI websites are not coming from a reputable source. They're not coming from a human being who's an authority on the subject. So you cannot use these engines as a source. You have to find a source that comes from somebody that's written by somebody. Let's now look at some examples, and I'm going to start off looking at our library database. So I'm on the nwic.edu homepage, and we're going to go to the Lummi Library link up here at the top. I click on that, takes me to the page, and I'm going to go to Library Resources A to Z Databases. And this is something you will inevitably go over many times in your English courses and other classes as well. So I'm not going over this in depth, but these databases are different journals covering different types of subjects. Some of them are more broad than others, such as JSTOR covers a lot of different subjects. But then some of these are a little bit more narrow, health and wellness article, for example. And all of these articles in our database are credible sources. They are coming from researchers, from scholars, so you are able to use these in your research, and you'll see an example of this in the quiz. Now, I'd mentioned finding a news article on a specific event, in this instance, Standing Rock pipeline protest. And this is an article from a courthouse news service. It is a .com, so we want to be more careful if it's coming from .com. But I went to their website. It seems reputable. It seems well put together. So I read it, and the reporter covered the event that was going on in the ongoing event, I should say, in the larger issues at hand. So one could use this as a source. And this articles have to be covering a specific event. It can't be an opinion on a subject. It needs to be more of a report. And you may often be using this if you're doing historical research. For example, if you're looking at the Billy Frank Jr. protest, you may pull an old article from those protests in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I pulled up the Wikipedia for Dakota pipeline protest. This Wikipedia is not a reputable source. You cannot use Wikipedia. I repeat, you cannot use Wikipedia. It's sometimes a common misconception. One thing you can do with Wikipedia, though, is if you want to read it to get a general idea of a subject, Wikipedia has links to outside research. They source their information. So you can actually click on the number if a sentence or a paragraph you read seems like it's useful to you. And then you can go to the website that they have sourced the information from. And you have to be careful because Wikipedia is not vetting the sources that the writers of their articles are using. So you have to click on the link and see whether or not the source is credible for your own research. And the reason, I should have said this up front, the reason Wikipedia is not authoritative is A, because we don't know who's writing it. They may or may not be an expert in the field. And B, it's not peer reviewed. There is not somebody reviewing it to make sure it's unbiased. Or I should say there's not somebody thoroughly vetting it and making sure that the info is unbiased. There's not somebody correcting it before it's published. It's not somebody looking at the sources and making sure they're credible. So that's why we cannot use Wikipedia as a source. Okay, and we'll look at a few other instances of research that you may need to use for other classes. Statistics are something that's really important that you may need in research. So generally speaking, we want to find, for using statistics, we want to find .org websites or .gov websites for statistics. Just looked up demographics of the Lummi Reservation, and this .org website provides us that data. And additionally, you can use tribal websites, .gov websites, and then this Nisqually website gives some basic information on Nisqually history. And so if you're ever doing research on the tribe, on your tribe, you can come to the website and use that information and source it. All right, everyone. So that is a very basic introduction to credible and non-credible sources. It will help prepare you for the quiz that you'll be taking and the beginning of your academic journey here at NWIC.